Hi guys, and welcome back to my life. I can't seem to get my camera to balance very well today, so sorry about that. Yeah, thank you for watching, and as I said last night, during the month of May, which is EDS Awareness Month, I'm going to try and do a few things that are a little more structured rather than just talking about my day. Although you'd be pleased to know, I finally managed to have my shower. It's lovely to have clean hair, and I did make it to Paint Club, which is good. I had to rely on Stephen to post my parcel, and I didn't get any laundry done and I didn't get any knitting done, but the very important things of shower and Paint Club were achieved, which is good. So today I want to talk about just how rare Ehlers-Danlos is. So people always say, where when you have a bit complaint that the doctors don't know about this, and it's always misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. Almost everyone with EDS isn't diagnosed until well into adulthood and long after the symptoms become a problem, because doctors simply don't know anything about it. And people say, well, it's a rare disease and you can't expect doctors, GPs, general practitioners, to know every single rare disease that there is or how to spot it. Here's the thing though, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is not rare. Some subtypes of it are. There are 13 different subtypes of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Most of them have a genetic test because the gene responsible has been identified. But the most common type, which is the type I have, obviously I'm common, is hypermobility type. Used to be called type 3. But the criteria were updated last year. So it's now known as hypermobility Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It currently doesn't have a genetic test. There are a number of different genes that have been implicated, so to speak, but they haven't managed to narrow it down yet. It may be that several genes are involved, but it's definitely genetic. It definitely runs in families. It definitely seems to have dominant inheritance characteristics. So if you don't know anything about genetics, most disorders are what they call recessive, which is to say that if you carry the gene on, you have two copies of, I'm going to say you have two copies of every gene. That's the wrong way to phrase it. And it isn't really quite right, but that's just me as a geneticist. My original calling in life was to be a biochemist, and I studied biochemistry and genetics at university. So I kind of want to get this right, but the easy way to say it is, you have two copies of every gene. One that you get from your mum and one that you get from your dad. And if you have a normal copy and a broken copy, then it's okay, because the normal copy means that you still function okay. There are very few diseases that have a dominant characteristic for inheritance, which is to say that if you get a normal copy from one parent and a broken copy from the other, it's the broken one that expresses itself. And Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is one of those rare conditions. So I'd heard of it as a rare dominant inherited condition when I was 18 years old. But at no point did anyone suggest what any of the symptoms were or what it actually caused. It was just a dominantly inherited disease. If only I knew then. But what that means in a family, if a gene is recessive, both parents can be apparently normal and give birth to a poorly child. But they only have a 1 in 4 chance of doing so. With a dominantly inherited characteristic, at least one of your parents must also be suffering from the disease. So you'll be able to see it passed down, and it has a 50% chance of being inherited. Now, I don't know, my mum did actually have 4 children, but only 2 of us survived to adulthood. Perhaps the other 2 were, well, obviously they're not the lucky ones, but perhaps they got away without this, I don't know. But certainly my sister and I both inherited the dodgy gene. And it looks like my sister's children have too. But there's a thing. Now, hypermobility subtype, as the name suggests, one of the primary diagnostic criteria is hypermobility. Your collagen doesn't work properly, therefore your ligaments all stretch too far. You can bend most, if not all, of your joints significantly further than is normal, often to a dangerous degree. They come out of joint a lot easier than is normal. Maybe you have stretchy skin, although actually only about 30% of people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome have stretchy skin. And what is considered stretchy, as I've discussed in a previous video, is not nearly as stretchy as you think it is. Those few doctors who have heard of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome have nearly always heard of the stretchy skin thing, and then they will disregard it because you don't have stretchy skin. Anyway, so I was talking about how rare it is. Dominantly inherited. So it just can't be that rare. You know, for a disease that has a variable expression, and some people who have it or carry the gene for it and suffer many of the symptoms do so at a subclinical level. You know, if I'd continued the way that I was in my 20s, it never would have bothered me that I didn't have a diagnosis. You know, I had a lot of niggles. I suffered from migraines, I suffered from IBS, I bruised easily. Obviously, I was super bendy. My skin was relatively fragile, I had varicose veins, but none of these things were an interference to my life. Well, the migraines sometimes were. It's only once I got past 30 and the subluxations and dislocations started to become more frequent, the pain started to build up, the fatigue started to build up, and the dizziness associated with potentially POTS began to increase. That's when it became a problem for me. Now obviously I've always had the disease. It's just over the years its expression changed as my body aged, and its ability to compensate for those problems changed as hormonal changes affect it too. Sometimes stress, and I did go through a very stressful work period around about then, although some of that might have been caused by the beginnings of the EDS, chicken and egg. So you have to wonder how it can be so rare. And it turns out actually it's not. Most estimates these days will say 1 in 5,000 people, which makes it about 5 times as common as cystic fibrosis. However, there are some estimates that suggest that up to 1% of the population, 1 in 100 people, could have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or the subclinical classification of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is known as hypermobility spectrum disorder. If ever you get told by a doctor that you have joint hypermobility syndrome, that is an outdated name for hypermobility spectrum disorder. It no longer exists as a classification, just so you know. So yeah, 1% of the population, because we really don't know. It's so misunderstood, it's so variable in expression. As I say, some people can go their whole life with nothing more than, 100 different little niggles that don't seem to connect up, but none of which impacts the life that badly. And some people are wheelchair bound and fed through a tube because the stomach issues are so bad, and the pain issues and the fatigue issues and the dislocations are so bad. And all of those people in the middle, like myself, repeatedly get diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. Quite frequently we're told basically it's all in your head, and we're sent for CBT instead. The pain and the fatigue are all a side effect of depression. Fibromyalgia is the one of choice at the moment, which isn't to say that someone who genuinely does suffer from fibromyalgia is in any way suffering less than someone with EDS. I'm sure that sometimes it's a lot more. It's just a different type of pain, and it doesn't fit the pattern of EDS, but some of it overlaps, and that's what the doctors cling on to. So it's very difficult to see how common it really is, because it's either not diagnosed or misdiagnosed so frequently. Among my own friendship circle, excluding my sister and my nieces, because obviously, genetic bias there, but I reckon I probably know at least half a dozen other people who I think qualify at least for a diagnosis of hypermobility spectrum disorder, if not Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And yeah, I'm sure I don't know that many people. I have a little over 100 Facebook friends, and yet I can point to 4 or 5 of those who I think fit the criteria. Rare my arse. So, I'm going to show you a little bit now, just to say that the information is out there, even if your doctor doesn't have it. And it comes in a variety of forms. This is the easy form. So this is a little booklet by Hannah Enser, who is the woman behind Stickman Communications, which I've mentioned before. She designed the little pacing sticky notes, and my flashcards and disability badge. Disability badge, not like a blue badge, it's like a hidden disabilities badge that I wear, just so that I don't have to constantly keep saying, yeah, I look normal, but it doesn't mean I am. But yeah, so this little book has lots of cute little cartoons in it. But it does give you a good description of what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is like in a very simple format. If you want more information than that, if you are medically inclined, I might have to move this back so you can see it. Then there's this. So this is just hypermobility type Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It doesn't cover any of the other 12 types, just hypermobility type. There's a lot of detail in there, and you can see, you know, that's a little minor breakdown of the symptoms there on the front, if you can see it beyond the reflections of parts of my room. And this is a lifesaver sometimes. I haven't read it all. I've picked and chosen little bits from it, but it really does help when your doctor doesn't understand. You know, if it gets too much for you to be able to explain, you can just take this in with you and say, look, I'm not making it up, it's a real thing, and look, every single thing that I'm describing that is wrong with me fits into it. In fact, this week I discovered something that I'd never known before is related to my EDS. My whole life I haven't been able to eat raw tomatoes without it causing digestive upset, shall we say. Not so bad once they're cooked. I still find them quite acidic, and I wouldn't want to eat a lot. I'm not a big fan of like tomato-based sauces, unless you add loads of cream, which might explain one reason why I'm the size I am. But yeah, I find them quite difficult to digest. But if they're raw, much as I love the flavour, I kind of eat them. They just really upset my stomach. And it turns out that among the many food intolerances, one of the most common that people with EDS have is intolerance of any plant in the nightshade family. And the two most common plants of the nightshade family that human beings eat are tomatoes and potatoes. Now, I've not noticed a problem with potatoes. But then you eat a different part of that. You don't eat the fruit. You eat the tuber from the bottom. Maybe that's why. Learning something new every day. And every single time I find that it all fits into place. I've yet to find a health issue that I have that can't be explained as, at the very least, something that I have an increased chance of because of suffering from EDS. And I think it's essential, if you suffer from it or you know anyone who suffers from it, to educate yourself significantly, because it's a miracle if you find a doctor, a nurse, even a specialist rheumatologist who understands anything and whose knowledge is up to date. So you find yourself educating them. But that's a whole new story about doctors who don't like to be educated by their patients and refuse to listen. So I'm not going to go into that just now. I have an appointment in the morning. We know I'm not good with mornings. To see the specialist POTS nurse, and I'm looking forward to this, because if it's the same nurse that my sister saw, then she knows about EDS, she understands, and I'm looking forward to talking to someone who knows and understands. So fingers crossed. That's all for now. I'm going to go to bed and hope like hell that I am fit and awake and alive in the morning. Night night, guys. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.